have been thinking a lot about pilgrimage in these days. As we preach through the Psalms of Ascent, even though the content of these Psalms changes a little bit, the reality is that they are songbooks from pilgrimage. So Chandra talked about Camp Kadesh, and Dallin talked about a trip in Scotland and a pilgrimage, a hike. So I'm going to talk about something that, as I went through the weeks, is a little bit like a pilgrimage. I don't think it really quite qualifies, but my siblings and I gather every summer in Manitoba in the Riding Mountains, and I just don't know. Sometimes it feels like a pilgrimage because when you keep going, something distracting, something funny on the screen. This is my siblings and I. After a good ice cream, this is my brother Ken on the left and my sister Janine on the right. Every day includes ice cream on this pilgrimage to Riding Mountain National Park. This year we did a lot of biking. They redid the whole shoreline between the main beach and Deep Bay, so there was a lot of conversation about how did they get these rocks in. We're thinking maybe it was an ice road when the lake was frozen over. Guesses about how many rocks. And there was, of course, some stacking and skipping of rocks that happened. And the lake. The lake is cold. It is spring-fed, so it has to be pretty warm for you to voluntarily go in. The zebra mussels have been found in the lake, so they continue to screen any watercraft coming in, and there are, for the present, no motorboats allowed on the lake. And there's a lot of conversation about this among the cabin owners who also own boats. Does this count as pilgrimage? I'm not sure. It is a returning to the same place year after year. It's been 7 years in a row now that my sister and my brother, sometimes my sister from Texas, she came once. Many of our kids have camped together around this weekend. And we begin to measure ourselves by the years. So there were the years that every child and grandchild of my parents were able to come. Then there was the year that we couldn't cross the boundary, the Manitoba boundary, because of COVID. And then there was the year that my brother had food poisoning from a bad batch of sushi, and he still could out-hit me in tennis. That was not fun. And there was the year we played beach volleyball, the year Brady graduated, the year our Gina was oh so pregnant with Cassia. It's a bit of pilgrimage when you return to the same place, and the place begins to hold meaning and to hold memories. And so as we keep going through these Psalms of Ascent, these Psalms that were Israel's playlist for their pilgrimage to Jerusalem year after year, I just invite you to think about pilgrimage for yourself, for this community. Pilgrimage is not something that is on our list of spiritual practices, but I'm just thinking about it a lot and thinking about the way that our bodies get involved in our spiritual life by what we do. Kids, I think it's a bit like pilgrimage when you go to summer camp, when you remember the cool things about camp, and you remember some of the ways maybe that you encountered God at that camp, that you found that God was real. And you go back year after year hoping that God will do it again, that God will show up, that God will remind you that the creator of the universe, he knows you and loves you. And then for the youth and young adults, maybe pilgrimage is similar. It's a camp or a retreat or a place that you come back to because God has met you there. And God continues to meet you there and remind you in new ways that you belong to him, that God knows your name and he's invested in your life. So you give up a week of your summer or a month or the whole 2 months, or you go for a weekend somewhere to a place where you experience the presence of God, or a place where healing took place. Like, we know that God is present everywhere. We know that place doesn't limit God. But there's something about place. There's something about place. Maybe it's the women's retreat. Maybe it's a regular trip with a friend to go fishing or run a marathon. Arlington's family camp, where Airlie shows up with great fun and creativity. Camp Oshkoty's family camp. There are so many camps and places that seem like they are pilgrimage, where we meet each other and we experience God and his world in new ways. Places we return to. Eugene Peterson talks about it this way in his book that we're basing this whole series on. He says that we are people who spend our lives going someplace, going to God, and whose path for getting there is the way, Jesus Christ. And we realize that this world is not my home, and we set out for the Father's house. And Abraham, back in the Old Testament, who went out for the first time, is a bit of an archetype for this pilgrimage. And Jesus, when he answered Thomas's question, "Master, we have no idea where you're going. How do you expect us to know the road?" And Jesus gives us these directions. "I am the road. I am the truth and also the life. So no one gets to the Father apart from me," he says in John 14. And then the letter to Hebrews defines our program. It says, "Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on, it means we better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're on." So our whole life, from the first breath to our last, is seen as one pilgrimage. That's how the Christian faith is framed, and journeys away from the everyday work of our life, from the everyday places where we drive and eat and play, like away from the everyday, can sometimes jolt us awake to remind us of this pilgrimage. Can jolt us awake to God, can jolt us awake to ourselves, who we are, maybe where we've drifted to. So I invite you to just keep thinking about pilgrimage as we look at our psalm for this day. Psalm 126. "It seemed like a dream, too good to be true, when God returned Zion's exiles. We laughed, we sang, we couldn't believe our good fortune. We were the talk of the nations. God was wonderful to them." God was wonderful to us. We are one happy people. And now, God, do it again. Bring rains to our drought-stricken lives, so those who planted their crops in despair will shout hurrahs at the harvest. So those who went off with heavy hearts will come home laughing with armloads of blessing. I know the print is small, but I just wanted you to see that whole psalm on one screen, because the first lines are looking backward at the amazing thing that God had done. It was so good it felt like a dream, this return from exile. Things were so disrupted for so long that it seemed like it would never be redone. But God was wonderful to them, and it's praise erupting from this. Praise erupting from God acting in their lives, even in the midst of their sorrows. God was wonderful to us. And then the psalm does like a total 180 pivot towards petition. Or actually, it's a command. It's "do it again, God." And that thread of a dream-like goodness infuses the entire psalm from the beginning to the end. Have you ever felt that kind of joy? It's a joy that like fills your chest till you just grin. Like it's got to break out somewhere. Or you laugh because it just bubbles up inside of you. Or maybe it comes out as tears. Maybe it's joy that comes out as tears. Maybe you actually start jumping. And this is the good thing about kids. You can, like, their body tells you. I was watching a little girl cross the street, and she just skipped the whole way across. Just skipped across the street and kept skipping across the sidewalk. It would look a bit odd if I did that, I think. That would just not work. But joy is something that just kind of bubbles up. And maybe you're somebody who sits very still. You just sit very still when you're joyful, but everything inside of you is vibrating. It's a feeling of unreal anticipation when a dream is about to come true, when you're just around the corner from the camp you love, or when you're about to see your best friend for the first time in a year, or like when you are just about to taste the first red raspberry. It's ready. Or when you got the job you've been working toward. Or maybe when she said yes. When grandpa takes you fishing. Or when you hold your newborn. Joy. when you are known and fully loved. In a world where every day we hear news of war and of sickness and despair, and when we may experience or know someone who experiences crippling anxiety, joy and praise can feel maybe heartless, or maybe inauthentic, maybe out of touch. But what if praise is not some fake flattery or some put-on reality, but it's the most earnest business that we can undertake? What if we praise God so that we can see the world the way God sees it? So praise isn't only an outflow of our joy, but it's actually something we decide to do so that we see the world differently than our perspective. Praise isn't only that God gives us something and we give thanks, but praise is a way that we discover how much God has given us. And it's an identity-claiming thing. It's an identity-claiming thing. Israel knew itself as a people who had been put on this planet to praise God. Even when lamenting, they are looking for a reason to praise because it's their identity. And those thoughts come from Ellen Davis in her book, Getting Involved with God. So maybe you are still in the middle of exile that is referred to in the beginning of this psalm. You have not yet seen the goodness of God. Despite the length of your journey, you can't yet look back and say, look how God rescued. Maybe he didn't rescue. There is no laughter. There are no songs to sing that resonate in your heart. What is pilgrimage like when you are still longing to see the goodness of God in your life? How does this song feel when someone traveling with you is singing about God's goodness? It's what happens here on a Sunday morning. Some of us are weeping and others are celebrating. Some of us are longing and others are just full. Some of us wait for unanswered prayer while others are speaking out their thanks. And sometimes the joy of others makes our pain feel amplified in comparison. But perhaps the joy of others as we are on pilgrimage together can also help to carry our pain. And what if others can help you to sing songs of your lament, because they are also here in the Psalms? How long, Lord, will I wait? But this day, today, from this point in our pilgrimage, on this psalm of our pilgrimage playlist, the pain of exile and the pain of abandonment of God are like a bad dream fading. And I just want to say that preaching on joy is tricky. Saying to someone who is not in a place of joy and saying, you shall be joyful, never works in reality. And I kept thinking of Maya Stilby this week as I thought of joy as an elusive thing. How many successful growers of Astilbes are there out there? I just want to know. Not a one. Oh, there is one. Oh, yeah. Do I want to talk to you about this or do I not? That is the question, because they don't like me, Astilbes. They do not like me back. I love Astilbes. I have planted it more times than I care to admit. I buy it when it's got this feathery top that's like pink or purple, or like some of them are white, but like it's really beautiful. And the foliage is like this really cool texture. It's really nice. So I buy it when it's in full bloom, of course, and it'll survive, like fine. It's like, oh great, I'm home with Darlene, and it's like it'll sit there reluctantly, and then winter comes and I watch it disappear under the snow, never to bloom again. It'll sometimes emerge slowly in the spring, later than other perennials, usually only after I go digging for it to find it. I'm sure I planted one somewhere and I'll go digging, and it's just sitting there with like one little like thing ready to grow, and it's like, oh fine, she found me. And then it'll like, sorry, I really, we have conversations, this is Stilby and I. And so I cover it back up, leave it to its privacy, or sometimes like I move it to a better place. I think you don't like it there, I'll move you here, I'll give you a nice drink of water, and the thing will finally like uncurl and come up above ground with like beautiful foliage, but it'll just sit there and glare at me. Like, my sister's lovely mother-in-law was a fierce and a funny and a faith-filled gardener named Eleanor. She gave me one of her amazing stilbies. It too became irritated with me, and after a false start just died. The year that Eleanor passed away, I bought 5 astilbes. Like, I have a thing for them. Like, I don't give up easily. I put them in all kinds of legitimately hospitable places in my yard. There is no success with astilbes. My friend, out of pity, gave me a nice, sturdy goat's beard. Astilbe is called false goat's beard. And there, she said, now you have an astilbe. But I do not. I have a false astilbe. It's a wannabe astilbe. So I just want to say that sometimes joy can feel like an ever-elusive astilbe in your garden. It's like that thing that is supposed to grow, but it just won't. It just won't flourish. And this morning is not to guilt you for the astilbe that won't thrive. It is to give hope for joy. So I invite you to let this psalm and this pilgrimage that we're on keep leading you, keep inviting you towards our God. Let praise be something that helps you to see the world the way God sees it. And maybe, just in the same way that we prayed the Lord's Prayer this morning, this psalm can be a prayer that sustains you. If you Google or on Spotify look up Psalm 26, there's quite a list of artists that have written music to this. And some of them are sung in a minor key. Some of them are strong praise, but sometimes you can let these songs play in the background. And the prayers can sustain you. Sometimes these prayers can sustain us. We don't have to pray the prayers that sustain us. A prayer that you can pray when you don't have your own words. When life feels like a bad dream and there are dreams that you cannot even give voice to. It seemed like a dream, too good to be true, when God returned Zion's exiles. We laughed, we sang, we couldn't believe our good fortune. We were the talk of the nations. God was wonderful to them. God was wonderful to us. We are one happy people. And now, God, do it again. Bring rains to our drought-stricken lives so that those who planted their crops in despair will shout hurrahs at the harvest, and those who went off with heavy hearts will come home laughing with armloads of blessing. Now, this message has been shaped significantly by some of the conversations that I have had this week. Conversations with Dallin as we talked about pilgrimage as a spiritual practice. Conversations with Carissa as we talked about praise and joy in this psalm. And she talked about a song that has sustained her family through generations. Even through difficult times, her grandfather had them sing a song, and they sang them through the hard times and through the good times. Also, my message has been shaped by conversations with Darren and Shona and Christopher Nickel and with Jonathan as they shared with me about a trip back to the Ukraine with their families back in 2019, taking Ivana back to the place where she was born and taking their families back to the orphanage and the country where they first met Ivana and she became their daughter. They spoke of their first trip as a trip of hope and a trip of desperation. A journey they would never have wanted to take, but a journey that so much felt like God's hand was at work. They went to the Ukraine in May and June of 2007, and Jonathan, who's Darren's brother, came for about 10 days of their time there. Jonathan and Tanis had worked in an orphanage in Russia in the 1990s, and so it made sense for Jonathan to join them for part of this trip that had such a specific purpose, for Darren and Shona to bring back a child. Jonathan was so helpful with translation. Words came back quickly when they were there, and he was so certain that the Holy Spirit was helping his understanding. He helped to bring a sense of home to Ukraine, helped them with navigating with the ability to shop for groceries, tasks of everyday life. So much was uncertain in the weeks that they were there. And there were days when they were not sure that they'd be able to bring her home. But each day that they could, they spent time with their little Ivana, who was almost 23 months old at the time and understood only Ukrainian. And then on the day that they were finally given the okay to bring her home, the final task that they did at the orphanage was to exchange the clothes that she wore from the orphanage to new clothes that Darren and Shona had brought for her. And Shona and Darren both think of these weeks as 6 weeks of labor for Ivana. Now, the trip that I'm framing as pilgrimage happened 12 years later when they went back. It was 2019, 1 year before COVID and 3 years before the war between Russia and Ukraine. And this journey was a gift. Ivana was now old enough to have this trip be a meaningful one for her. It was important for the family to see where Ivana came from, and important for her to see where she came from, and even to see life there again. Tanis and Jonathan happened to be in Europe at the same time, so they could travel together. They spent 1 day in the orphanage and met workers in the orphanage who had been there when Ivana was there. They remembered her. They remembered her. And they talked about how important it was that Darren and Shona had come because Ivana needed to be in their family. And as I listened to Darren and Shona and Christopher and Jonathan talk about that trip, they talked about memories. So Christopher remembered the sound of rain on a tin roof. Jonathan had no memories of how hot it was. It was apparently 35 degrees. They all remembered the good food. And this too is part of pilgrimage, when we travel together, helping each other to remember, making sense together of the events. And it was one of the workers who had cared for Ivana as a child who said that Ivana needed to be in their family. Together they saw Ivana embrace her identity in a new way, a child of Ukraine and a child of Darren and Shona. And together they testified to the hand of God in their family as they traced this journey. Together they traveled into both familiar and into new territory. This is pilgrimage, friends. And this is community. And a story that becomes an anchor point for a family. Surely this is a place to sing Psalm 126. It seemed like a dream, too good to be true, when God returned Zion's exiles. We laughed, we sang, we couldn't believe our good fortune. We were the talk of the nations. God was wonderful to them. God was wonderful to us. We are one happy people. And now, God, do it again. Bring rains to our drought-stricken lives, so those who planted their crops in despair will shout hurrahs at the harvest, so those who went off with heavy hearts will come back laughing with armloads of blessing. Do it again, Lord. Do it again. Do you hear the hope as the psalm turns to petition? I invite you this morning to think about the anchor points for your faith story. What are the stories that are your reference when you say, do it again? We know that you can because we saw you at work here. And because we have seen these things, we can tell God what we long for, asking God to do it again. Maybe it's one of the Old Testament stories. Maybe it's a story of Esther. Maybe it's a story of the people of God going through the Red Sea and God rescuing them from slavery. Maybe it's one of the stories of Jesus healing as he walked through this world. Maybe it's a story in your own family when God showed up in ways that you did not anticipate. Because even in our petition, our praise can help us to see the world as God sees it. So are there stories that are anchor points for you? So I was thinking about anchoring as in a web. Kids, I don't know if you've got this spider web thing. I don't do this very well, but you know, Spider-Man, right? He anchors to something. and then he swings. So that's where my metaphor breaks down, like immediately. Like you anchor to something and then you swing away. But like, is there something that if you were building a net, if you were building something that would sustain you, that would anchor you, what are the stories that you would anchor to so that you can swing where you need to, so that you can be anchored? I invite you this morning to anchor yourself in the God who is revealed in this psalm, in a God who restores, who rescues, in Jesus who redeems, in the Spirit who lives and works among us. Let's go on pilgrimage together, Lakeview, to discover the ways that we experience God's faithfulness. Let's keep telling each other these anchoring stories of God's goodness, of God's presence, of God's leading. This is how, together, we are shaped to be God's people, on pilgrimage together, till we see Jesus face to face. Could you stand with me and let's read this psalm together? It seemed like a dream, too good to be true, when God returned Zion's exiles. We laughed, we sang, we couldn't believe our good fortune. We were the talk of the nations. God was wonderful to them. God was wonderful to us. We are one happy people. And now, God, do it again. Bring rains to our drought-stricken lives, so those who planted their crops in despair will shout hurrahs at the harvest. Those who went off with heavy hearts will come home laughing with armloads of blessing.